At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. You're listening to the SNES broadcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello everybody, this is Super NES Podcast episode 163. I am Greg, as joined by always by Joe.
Hello.
And yes, we are back to it. We're back to a regular two-host format for right now. Don't worry, we have more guest hosts to get light up in the future. But I hope everybody out there enjoyed our recent episodes with Phil and Aaron before that. Many thanks to them again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you may know from listening to the podcast last time, we covered a Godzilla game, Super Godzilla, on the podcast last time with Phil. I did not know that Joe wanted to cover another Godzilla game on this podcast. So we're looking at another one this time around. Which one are we looking at this time, Joe?
This is the Godzilla fighter. Godzilla, was it Monster Wars is the translation, I believe, or something like that.
The actual literal translation of the game is Godzilla Strange Beast Great War.
Okay.
Because the Japanese name of this game is Kaijū Daikessen. Godzilla Destroy All Monsters was the name it would have been given had it received an English release as
there we go.
Planned to.
Okay.
So, but yeah, anyway, this is the other Godzilla game that came out on the Super NES slash Super Famicom. So this came out a little bit. This came out a little bit after Super Godzilla. This came out in Japan in December of 1994. This is a 2D fighting game, a la Mortal Kombat, a la Street Fighter, a la everything else you pretty much saw during this time period. But not the first Godzilla game to do this format. This is actually a sequel to a very lesser known game, which actually did get a U.S. release this time. The prequel to this game came out on the Turbo CD in Japan. And they did get ported here to the West under the name of Godzilla Battle Legends for the TurboGrafx CD, which it's like, why that game got it ported to the West and this game did not makes no sense to me, considering the fact the TurboGrafx CD was probably bought by like two people over here.
Right.
But hey, it is what it is. I started trying to figure out why they decided to bring certain games from Japan over here to the States a long time ago.
Right.
But at least the situation's better now than it was before in the past.
That's very true.
Like, a lot more games are coming, or a lot more games are getting translated right over here to the West. If not originally, eventually several years down the line. And most of the stuff staying in Japan these days is very Japan centric.
Right.
So nobody's really going to mind the fact that the game's not over here. So I'm sure eventually technology is going to get to the point where we'll be able to simply just to plug in a ROM and then be able to plug in a program on the side and just have it translate the Japanese for us on the fly.
Right.
But until that day comes. But anyway, so yeah, this game here, Kaijū Daikessen, is just like a sequel to that earlier game. Just pretty much expand. The formula was the same. It's just that there's more monsters. There's more monsters in this version of the game. There's more stages. There's more combo moves. So this really is the better version of the game. So this game was developed by a different company. I'm not going to go into a lot of we're not going to cover a lot of the generalities of the Godzilla games and the franchise as a whole. We just covered about that with Phil last episode. So if you want to go in depth about that, please check out that episode. So we're just gonna get right into it here, at this one. This game is as just mentioned, was done by a different company. This game is developed by a company called Alpha System, which is actually a very big company, at least in Japan. Most of their, like a lot of other Japanese companies, a lot of their games did not come out here in the West, but Alpha's been around since 1988. They were very heavy NES console, TurboGrafx, TurboDuo, whatever in the early years before branching out to make games like other systems such as the computer, the PS2, the Xbox, the Game Boy Advance, PlayStation, Saturn, etc., etc. They're still around today. They were bought out. They were bought out just like a few months ago, as of recording this podcast, February 2021, by a Japanese company called Meteorize. But they're still a very active developer. This is their first game, the Super NES, actually, as a matter of fact. Up to this point, they simply been developing for the TurboGrafx CD. So, games of theirs that came out in the West that people may know about. They developed Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair for the Turbo CD. They developed Ys 3 Wanders from Ys. They're also like Turbo CD. They also handled the earlier Godzilla fighting game that I mentioned previously, of course. They handled the PlayStation port of Myst. Let's see. Elemental Gearbot for the PlayStation was one of their games. Mobile Light Force 2 for the PS2. Tales of the World for the PSP. Phantasy Star Portable 1 and 2 for the PSP were done by them. And then recently their series and recently their main franchise has been a role-playing series called Sister Royale, Five Sisters, which has come out for PC, Xbox One, PS4, and Switch in both Japan and North America. So as mentioned before, this is a fighting game. It's pretty much a pretty typical one-on-one beat 'em up game, as you would expect of a game like this type. There are a game start 8 monsters to pick from. There are some bonus monsters that you can also unlock, aka get to, which we'll cover here in a little while. But the game has 3 difficulty levels: easy, normal, and hard. So it does allow you to be able to kind of ease into it. There are bonuses for playing at the higher difficulty levels because you unlock different monsters, like you play at normal or hard as opposed to easy. So certain monsters, of course, are like any fighting game. Some monsters are more powerful than than the monsters. I don't know, Joe, about your experience with fighting games. I'm not a huge fighting game lover. I do like some of them, but I'm not really a big fan of the franchise. So I'm not the expert to speak on things like this. But my initial impressions of the game, I really because I played this a little bit before in the past through emulation, but I hadn't really spent much time with it until this podcast. But my initial impressions were that the game of course has some balance issues like any kind of fighting game from the 90s does. Right. But as far as the monsters themselves, yes, some monsters are more powerful to use than other monsters. But I thought the game was very beatable and playable regardless of who you picked.
So my first outing with this game, I got my butt kicked. I couldn't get past the first stage. But I also found out there's 2 things with that. One, this game heavily relies on strategy and combos. You can't just button mash, which most fighters, you can button mash and get your way, at least through, a level or 2. But this game, yes, you can button mash and probably get through the first stage. I think if you if you kept jump kicking or jump punching, I'm sure you could do that. But I found it difficult myself to be able to do that. I had to actually learn the game and some of the moves, especially the use of the rage meter and the special move that you can do with that. So that was really fun and engaging because when I initially started playing this, you have your weak attack, you have your heavy attack, you have a dash, and then you have a hold button. L and R don't do anything. which I found out real quick. Because I'm thinking like, oh, it's like a typical fighting game, it's set up to where you got, your low punch, high punch, kick, all that. And that wasn't the case. But, yeah, I got my butt kicked. I was Godzilla, of course, and the first monster I fought was Gigan, which is the one like right next to him, I believe.
Yep.
And I don't know, he was like just shorter enough for like whenever I figured out how to do the atomic breath, which is basically like doing a Hadouken. He would do the fire breath, but it would just be over his head. Like, it wouldn't do any damage, and it was very frustrating. There's quite a few characters like that. But I also figured out that, you can choose who you fight for what stage, so that kind of helps. So I started off with the bigger monsters first, and then worked my way to where I specifically left Mechagodzilla for the end. But Mothra was a pain in the butt because of how small she is and the way she moves. And yeah, King Ghidorah was fun. That was one of those fights where, like, I actually felt like I was having to add in a bit of strategy. I had to let him hit me a few times so I could build up that rage meter and use that cool super breath move that he has. What's his name? Biolante, I think.
Yes.
He's huge, a huge sprite, and it's really nice and detailed, and I love the art on it. But he's also like, he's the guy to start off with, because no matter what you do, you're going to hit him. He's big. But also, that being said, there were a few times where like I jumped in the air to do like a a punch in the air, and he was able to snatch me out of the air and like bite me and throw me to the ground. So, there's definitely some strategy there, and I am a big fighting guy. So, this reminded me very much of Street Fighter 2 for you listeners here in America, but it really reminded me of the Dragon Ball Z games for the Super NES, or I should say Super Famicom, because I don't think we got any here in the West. Those games are incredible. And they're very much the same. You can't just button mash. You have to learn the combos. You have to learn the special moves. And it's all about strategy and timing and when to use those big moves. And this is very much the same. I rather enjoyed this, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was very intuitive. Like, even going in blind, if you don't know the controls, you can figure them out within, the first couple losses. You're going to figure out what you're doing. Yeah. And if you take that Street Fighter mindset, which, I mean, almost any game that's a fighting game that I pick up, if I don't do any research, the first thing I'm doing is, like, back, high punch to see if, I can do something like Scorpion's grab, or I do a Hadouken and see if that works. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, I've played so many fighters that the minute I'm in a fighter, I'm like, okay, what moves that I know from other fighters can be used here? And, like, as soon as I did the Hadouken and I got Godzilla's atomic breath, I was like, oh, it's on.
Yeah. That's a very good summary about the game. So I pretty much would have said the same things, same things about it that you did. So, just to go into a bit more detail. First of all, like I said before, this game is Japanese only. However, having said that, the game is very playable to us Americans, because it's like most of the game is actually in English.
I was actually surprised how much was in English.
Yeah, it is. The title screen is kind of half and half. The menu screen's mostly English. The game screen itself is entirely English. But the only real Japanese in the game is the monster names and stage names. Yep. So if you're not a big Kaijū fan and you don't know all the monsters by heart, you may have to look them up to see who's who.
Right.
But but beyond that, the game is very playable. There was no translated ROM I could find online, but like as I just said, the game is so much English that you really don't need it to be able to play it. I also was reminded about the Dragon Ball Z games playing this. We've not covered one of them on the podcast. We've covered an RPG in the past, the Dragon Ball Z RPG, but not actually one of the fighting games. But yeah, so it's kind of like a mesh of like Street Fighter 2 and Dragon Ball Z, I guess. Is how this comes up with.
Yeah.
So, like Joe said, the moves of this game are pretty standard, like for a game of this type. What's interesting, an interesting mechanic about the mechanic about this game that Joe touched upon, is the rage meter, in the sense that as a monster takes damage, that meter builds up, and if you're able to land enough hits fast enough, then the monster, the meter will get full maxed out, and the monster will be stunned for several seconds, which will allow you to be able to really dish in like a lot of damage, and not worry about like being counterattacked. So. And also warned you, and also mind you, the same thing happened to you. So if you take a lot of damage, you can get like knocked out for a while. So you got to be careful. So it's definitely like a very, like Joe mentioned, there is that kind of strategy with this game, in the sense that some monsters you do want to rush them and attack quickly, and other monsters you want to just stand back, because if you stand back and try to attack a long distance, because if you try to do that, you're going to get your butt handed to you with that rage meter being like thrown up on you. Yep. So, There's also separate meter reflected by the meter which reflected by the monsters themselves in the corner of the screen. When that gauge fills up, you'll be able to launch you'll be able to use your special attack. So in that sense, it's kind of typical to most fighting games. But the rage meter was something that's pretty unique.
Yeah.
I think I've seen that idea in a couple other games. I don't remember. I'm not really, but I couldn't really name them off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't think of off the top of my head another game that uses a rage meter like that.
There's a timer. It's a pretty generous timer, however, so you're not running problems like with that. You do have the ability to block. Blocking sometimes is very handy to help to minimize damage. And out of Street Fighter 2, you can also sometimes have like projectile versus projectile battles in the air, which is like pretty cool. Right. So, like Godzilla's breath does take a while to get the hang of, like you mentioned, Joe, because it's like there's three different versions like the attack that you can do in this game.
Right.
So, depending upon like how powered you are, like whatnot, it doesn't operate like Godzilla's breath does in the movies. So. They did take some creative license here with doing that. Having said that, I don't mind it that much. Because it's like pretty cool, like how you can do it.
Yeah.
So, the controls I thought were pretty good. As you mentioned, this game, you are encouraged to learn special attacks and combos as soon as possible. The main difficulty I had was it was grabbing. I thought grabbing this game was like pretty difficult to pull off.
Yeah, I pulled it off a couple times. Basically, after one of the enemies had grabbed me and bit me, I was kind of like, "Oh wait, you could do that," and kind of went from there. But yeah, I think I pulled it off like twice. You know what I mean? Through my entire playthrough. So I mean, it just punch. Just use the heavy punch. That's I didn't use the light punch at all. It was heavy punch, and waiting for that rage meter to fill and the little icon in the corner, and then doing the atomic breaths and a lot of jumping.
So the game's options are pretty robust for a game of this time period. As I mentioned before, you have like 3 different levels of difficulty like this game. There's also like a 2-player versus mode that you can do to like set it up to play against another human. You can change your color scheme as well in 2-player mode. And you can also there's also some additional monsters available to you to play in versus mode that are available to you in single mode. You can also set it up so that you can also have CPU play CPU if you want to as well. So if you just want to have like a demo game going on, or want to see how many it does with something, you can also like do that, which is pretty cool. So there's not many games in this time period like allow that feature. Yeah. So the 8 monsters that you have available to you from like a default, there's Godzilla, of course. These are all movie monsters. These are all movie monsters, by the way. Angrius, there's King Ghidorah, Gigan, Megalon, Mechagodzilla, Biollante, and Mothra. Unlike you, Joe, I actually thought that I actually thought that Biollante was the hardest monster to face because of the size and the attacks that she has.
Right.
Also, you also that ability to be able to grab you, as you mentioned before, and that bite does a lot of damage.
Yes.
So I find it very hard to land hits on her. I mean, like not because of her size, just because of her countering abilities.
Right. Right.
Like and whatnot. So I thought she was pretty like the super difficult battle. Mechagodzilla was right below her for me, but because that to be thinking about Godzilla has a lot of abilities, a lot of powerful attacks, and he's very durable.
Right.
So you definitely have to like wear him out and kind of like a slugging match. So, which again like feels faithful to the movies. And like like some of these fights are definitely faster paced.
Yeah.
Than the typical kaiju battles in the movies, but again, like before Super Godzilla, the developers really have a hard time trying to decide how much you want to balance gameplay features over realism.
Right.
So it's like some of the monsters, some of the fights are a little bit unrealistic, but it still makes for very most fights are pretty quick paced, fun. Like fun fighting affair.
Right.
Biollante and Mechagodzilla are a bit more drawn out to strategy field because the monsters are more difficult. So, Kikidora is tough, but I thought that he was not quite as bad as the other. As bad as the other two.
Yeah.
So, the monsters. So the monsters all take place in sets from movies that they've appeared in the past. You also hear their theme, playing like we're fighting them. So again, it's taken like from the movies.
Yep.
So, which means you're not going to hear Godzilla's theme unless you're actually playing against Godzilla.
Right.
So, which is too bad because it's a good version of Godzilla's theme. I think this version sounds better than the version that was in Super Godzilla.
I was going to say, when you start the game up, you get that theme. So, I mean, it's not you're not a total loss.
It's a different version though, playing the game because one of the games is like very fast paced.
Oh, okay. So I played as Godzilla, so I did not get to hear his theme in the game.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So. I mean, nothing wrong with playing like Godzilla. Godzilla is a very well-rounded fighter.
Right.
I think Mechagodzilla is a bit easier to play with, like for newbies, because of the attacks and durability he has. But you can't go wrong by either playing like either one of them.
Yeah.
So, definitely, I thought that Agorist and Megalon are definitely expert characters.
Yeah, definitely.
You can do well with them if you know what you're doing. But they're kind of like, what's the Street Fighter 2 equivalent?
I was gonna say be like Blanca or even Chun-Li,
Yeah, I actually do pretty good at Chun-Li.
Do you?
Chun-Li, even though I suck at the game, but the Blanca, I definitely agree with you on that.
Or Zangief.
Yeah, he's the one.
Zangief's the other one.
Oh yes, in later versions of the
Yeah.
game, right? Because he wasn't the original. He wasn't the original SF2, correct?
He was.
Came in later on.
He was. Barlog, Bison, and Vega were added in the later versions.
Oh yes, yep. Okay, right. Okay, gotcha. All right. Anyway, once you go, it's typical best of 3 matchup. So once again, this game has wonderful use of sounds too, because all the monsters' roars and sound effects are taken like the movies, which sounds great. So, once again, kudos to them for that. The background graphics can't be damaged and or destroyed, which is also a nice touch.
Yes.
So, I would have liked to seen a little bit more background destruction, but again, given how this is like a mid-90s game, I understand that they were limited to the technology and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed with what they had. I wasn't expecting that.
And then the final, and then after you beat after you beat your other 7 opposing monsters, you also go to like a final boss fight. Who you face off depends upon what difficulty level that you're playing. So, If you're on easy mode, you go up against the high side version of Mechagodzilla, who's faster, aka Mechagodzilla 2, who's much faster than his previous brethren. So this is a tough fight. He's definitely like a harder monster to defeat. Yeah. He is playable in 2-player mode as well. Off the bat, if you want to do that. So, and there is a code, you can enter on the title screen to allow you to play as him as well too. So, okay. If you're a normal difficulty level, your final opponent is Super Mechagodzilla, which is another enhanced version of Mechagodzilla. Technically, I guess version 3, but he was always considered to be like Super Mechagodzilla, so I'll roll with that. Right. So, this one's not playable in 2-player mode. However, let me make sure sorry, I had it backwards. You cannot unlock Mechagodzilla High C version. You can unlock Super Mechagodzilla. Sorry about that. So, 3 different versions of Mechagodzilla. I knew I was going to make that mistake here at some point. So if you're playing on hard mode, your final enemy in this game is Gotengo, who's a ship, like one of the movies. Very powerful ship. It has a drill. It can fly, fire lasers, release electric field, and also and also has a freeze weapon. So you definitely have your work cut out for you, like you're trying to defeat this version, like the monster. Again, you can unlock this character playing single player mode with a code code down the screen if you want to.
I would think that if you, as a player, unlock the ship to play as, it's like picking Oddjob in GoldenEye. It's cheap. Like he's low to the ground. It's very hard to hit. I actually died during that fight, and that's pretty much where I left it. So I'm interested to see if the final quote unquote cutscene was different, beating it on.
It's
expert.
not, unfortunately. I mean, yeah. So the ending's pretty much the same across the board. Just you just have you're a monster victoriously looking over the monster, looking over the monster that you just beat, in the staff credits roll.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's nothing really extra on that beyond the bonus of having a different monster to fight at the end. So. Having said that, however, the graphics of this game, as we already touched upon before, are very good. They're very detailed, sharp. The monsters look great. There's a bit of mode 7 in the game as you zoom into the stages to start the match. So, you're right. So your graphics of the game are very, very good as well. So, there's also let's see here. Sorry about that. I lost my voice here for a moment. There's also a cameo monster in the game, Batra, who can also who can see and or appears as an official attack by Mothra. Most of the monsters being available to you, either through the 2-player mode's a nice touch. All those codes being available to you, as well too. So, as mentioned before, this game did have a planned U.S. release. There was a brief article about it in the May 1995 issue of Nintendo Power. Where it appeared in the name of Godzilla Destroy All Monsters, which was the planned North American version of the game. So, it's not known if they played the Japanese version of the game, or if Toho had actually made it available to them to review a fully English version of the game. So, if such a version did exist, what happened to it since then is also unknown. So. He certainly has not been released it's not released in the wild. Right. It was apparently a last second cancellation based upon the fact that the May 1995 issue of Nintendo Power said it was supposed to be released the month previously. So like we speculated before, Toe probably changed their mind last minute, just just based upon how poorly Super Godzilla was sold over here in the West. So, which is a shame because all in all, this is a very good fighting game. I thought.
Yeah.
There are obviously there are newer, better fighting games available here in the West.
Oh yeah.
But such as but the time period, it's a very good game. I thought. It's the developers aired more on the gameplay factor as opposed to the realistic / movie factor this time around. But I think for the most part that works well because the game is pretty fast paced. I mean, maybe the monsters don't feel like these 100-ton, 100-foot tall versions of themselves when you're playing them, but there is a sense of power and fun going through the game and doing the matches and whatnot. Right. So and as you have mentioned, if the game's not a button masher, there's some strategy involved about this game with some matches like with others. Sorry. But yeah, all in all, this is a very good game. It's a shame it never came out here in the West.
Agreed.
So, that's most of the game in a nutshell. Before we move on here to finish things up with eBay and whatnot, did you have anything else about the game that you want to say, Joe?
No, I don't. I recommend that if you have an opportunity to play the game, definitely do it. It's a fun little piece of history. And it's kind of disappointing that we never got a full English translation of this. And I can understand why there hasn't been a fan translation. There's enough of this in English that you really don't need it. And if you go on, what's it called? GameFAQs and look up this game, there are people who have walkthroughs that give you all the details of what would be, told in the game. So you're not really missing out much.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a very good combo FAQ on there, which just gives you all the codes for the codes to combos and whatnot. So yeah, give that a look. Look up the monsters if you have to. Play Monsters like Who's Who. But yeah, I recommend this game for any fighting games fighting game fans out there. Definitely if you enjoy you don't need to be a Godzilla fan to enjoy this game. I think it helps if you're a Godzilla fan because it definitely have the wow factor, the kaiju and whatnot. But even if you're not, this is a very good fighting game for the time period. I mean, if you enjoy Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat-ish games, then this is definitely right up your alley. Yeah. I mean, yes, yes, the game can be cheap sometimes. Yes, there can be some very cheesy, overpowered moves, but again, that's it's part of the course of the time periods. So, anyway, pricing of the game. We already mentioned the codes in this game, so Super Mega Godzilla in Gutan. So, if you want to get this game online, it's not that hard to get, and a little bit pricey, but considering the fact this is a Japanese game and also also Godzilla game, that's not to be surprised. That's not it's not a shock. Right. 10 copies of this game are currently listed when I was doing research. 18 copies of the game are recently sold. Three of the copies that were sold recently came from North America, so there are options available for people in North America. If you're trying to get a copy cheaper, they're having to pay the higher shipping costs like in Japan. So, if you want a card only, these prices, and of course, these prices include shipping, and since most of these come from Japan, that's why the pricing seems like it's more expensive. The history recently for cards selling looks to be anywhere from $33 to $55 to get a copy of the game on cart. There were no copies of the game that sold recently as CIB, so I take this pricing based upon the estimated. So I take this pricing based upon what people were trying to get the game for currently, and also asking price and whatnot. Looks like if you want a copy of the game CIB, you expect to pay anywhere from $51 to $110, depending upon completeness and also how much, and also a condition factor. So
yeah, those prices aren't bad. If you're a collector, you're used to paying a little bit more for the physical cards. So that's not bad.
There are also reproductions available as you this game, as you would expect for a game that was Japan only. So basically, like I said before, I could not find a translated version of this ROM out there. So I'm sure these repro cards do use the Japanese ROM. However, they were put into English style, into a North American style cart. And they do have and they do have a very nice fan made mock-up Godzilla monsters label on them.
Nice.
So they do look like what they would have come out with. Probably look like had they got the U.S. release. Obviously, being a repro, these are more expensive, and they're currently available like only card only. You expect to pay you expect to pay $50-$60 like for one of these. So. Like I said, pricing's a bit pricier for what it is, but considering what it is, also not to be expected. To be expected, not to be surprised.
Right.
So, but anyway, this is a pretty good fighting game for its time period. I looked up. I've not played the prequel to this game, Super Godzilla. I'm sorry, Godzilla Battle Legends. So I looked it up on YouTube. Like I said, this is by all accounts the superior version of the game, because like I said, this has like more monsters, more stages, like more combos, like whatnot. So, so it's not going to hold a candle to, like I said before, it's not going to hold a candle to newer Godzilla games, but what it is, this is a very good looking, pretty fun fighting game.
Yeah, agreed.
So anyway. I guess that wraps this one up. Thank you again, as always, for tuning into the podcast. We very much appreciate your support. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, etc., feel free to leave them on our Facebook page. Or you can also email me directly. The email is the SNESpodcast@yahoo.com. Joe, how can they reach you?
You can reach me on Twitter at JOESUX30.
Alrighty then. And because of the fact that I picked two games earlier. I'm allowing you to pick two games back to back as well. So Joe's picking our next game for this podcast. What do you want to look at next time, Joe?
We're going to look at Tiny Toon Adventures Buster Bus Loose.
Yes, I've not played this game before, so this ought to be interesting.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I have played Hidden Treasure for the Genesis. So this should be fun to not only play, but also compare with that game, because I have very fond memories of that particular Genesis game. So.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. All right, should be fun. Yeah, so platformer should be like a different kind of game. So
seems I'm always bringing platformers to you.
Well, I mean, the library was loaded with platformers.
That's very true.
So, but it's because the 80s and 90s were golden times for platforming games.
That's true.
So at least 2D platforming games. Platforming is still a thing, but. But nowadays you get like 3D version or you get like indie throwback games. Right. So like Shovel Knight. So, that's fine. I like platformers enough. So, okay. So I appreciate everybody out there listening to the podcast as always. Stay tuned for more episodes. Stay tuned for more guest hosts coming up. Like as I mentioned, we will announce those as we get closer to their date. And definitely check this game out. Like if you're a fighting game fan, like it's kind of a hit. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a hidden gem, but it's a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, alrighty, take care, everybody, and we'll catch you again next time.
$200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.